All right, guys, welcome back to the Fitness in Philosophy podcast. Today, we are going to be discussing technology and fitness. James, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. I'm doing great here in Scottsdale, Arizona. How is it over there in Granger, Indiana? Population 107,000 people.
It is cold and gross relative to what is normally like Notre Dame graduation is not this weekend, but next weekend. And normally, like, it starts to be nice. You can walk around the Notre Dame lakes and it's sunny, and hopefully next week it'll be like that. But right
That's
now
so cool. That's
yeah.
so cool that, it's almost like indirectly how I describe how shitty it is in August here, but I use it in the opposite light. But it's so cool how you like, there's one centerpiece, right, of the whole year that gives you a reflection on like, how's the weather doing? Well, let's talk about Notre Dame graduation and what I remember to be, the weather at that time, right? That's pretty cool. And for me, it's the opposite, where August is almost like you're walking to the hottest planet, on the earth. You're going back to it from the nice cool lakes. And yeah.
I mean, don't you guys have, aside from like Death Valley, the record for the high, like the most days above 100 degrees or something like that? Or
yeah, it was just last August. We had a number of them over 110 or something like that. Now these measurements are taken, which should make sense for the environmental savvy individuals out there. These measurements are taken down at the concrete jungle. So we're in a slight different area close to the mountains. There is a discrepancy between averages, but still, man, it's gross hot. And just to keep going on that thread, just because people don't think it's all rainbows and butterflies here. The air pollution in the valley is horrible, right? It's not the cleanest place throughout the country. Just do your research. It's pretty bad with regards to particles. And it's ridiculously hot, like uncomfortable, unlivable hot for about 4 months of the year. Not 2 months, 4 months, where it's just like, gosh, you just can't hang out in that kind of stuff, right? Can't even do the things we like to do. But there's 8 wonderful months, and we're at the back end of those 8 wonderful months. It's May. In a couple of weeks, we're heading up to Idaho, and so I'm feeling it. I can feel the toes in the cold water, Robbie. I can feel my toes in the cold water.
Excellent.
Yeah.
I remember seeing a YouTube video once where they did like and you're probably way more familiar with this than I am, but they were doing a YouTube breakdown of like more well-off neighborhoods in Arizona versus less so ones where just tree coverage.
Yeah.
And how like the same exact temperature could be like just magnified by, whether there's tree coverage or not in the asphalt. And yeah.
Yep. And so people can read between the lines on what you said there, because that's a very stark, obvious thing if you come here with regards to where I live and the concrete jungle. So some things to think about there. A good podcast, I'll just if anyone's interested in the specific locale, it's called Unaffordable. And if you search that out, you'll be able to, but it talks about cost of living, homelessness, inflation, real estate. It talks about all those things in regards to under the Phoenix, Arizona umbrella. Really good reporting, really good stuff. So, but it brings up all of these things, right? So it's good. It's good knowledge to have.
Yeah. Do you guys have a cold plunge at OPEX HQ?
No. That would be, I don't know, a couple icicles in the top of the freezer. That's our cold plunge.
I will occasionally watch Shark
And cold
Tank.
plunges are cesspools. I mean, let's just say it. Unless they're private, come on.
Well, so there's this company that like I'd seen them kind of come through the interwebs and what have you, and their whole thing is ozone filtration and 5 micron blah 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 blah. They're trying to be like the Apple of cold plunges.
Okay.
And they went to the games and Rick Froning and blah 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 blah. They've been in business for 12 months. They went on Shark Tank and they got a $2.4 million deal with Robert Herjavec, 1.2 million of which goes for 15% of the company, and 1.2 million went for like funding purchase orders, which is probably one of the biggest deals in like Shark Tank history. for a cold plunge, for something that's like a very, very
Yeah.
niche
Yeah.
product, like in our like
But that
neck of the
doesn't
woods.
surprise me. It
Yeah.
doesn't surprise me just because the cultural perception is so strong on these biohack concepts, right? That people attach them
Yeah.
to, which does segue nicely there, Robbie, into the conversation today for
Yeah.
technology.
Yeah.
And lo and behold, I mean, there always used to be ice on water and these little holes you could just jump into. So, anyways.
True. But it's more sexy when you pay $7,000 for it.
Yes. Yes. And tell everyone about it.
Yes.
Right. Share it. I mean, you're not going to, who pays for that and then no one knows that they got it.
Yes.
Right. It probably comes with a sticker. It probably comes with a personalized Instagram account.
Yes. You get a discount if you play it on your Instagram account.
Right. $1,000 off if we see
Yes.
this play every 6 days for 40 days.
Yes. And then you're good to go. But you're absolutely right. I mean, yeah, that gets into our conversation about
The cold plunge
technology.
pool being technology, right?
Yeah, exactly.
A form
And
of
how much or little is that necessary to make us healthy relative to other very basic, non-costly things.
Yeah,
So
and
I
where it
figured,
fits inside the fitness, where
yeah,
because it's very just to back up to our pre-call conversation. Remember, we could get very big on it, but we'll try today to try to keep it in a lane of fitness.
Yeah.
All the things we talk about for behavior, exercise, nutrition, prescription, and like what that thing is. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I just today I was thinking about that with relation to like the temperature here, and like, as I'm sure you're aware, and other people probably listening to this are aware of, like, the bed jet and chili pad and these other things that modulate temperature when you sleep. And yeah, there is research to suggest that generally speaking, humans sleep better at colder temperatures. But just wondering, kind of from a historical perspective, people adapting to like their temperature and their given locale, and like, people slept in Louisiana in 1800, what I mean?
Yeah.
Like they
Yeah.
managed to figure this out somehow. And
Yeah.
like, was there any hormetic effect? Just interesting questions
Yeah.
surrounding that type thing.
Yeah, I see. I think even just keep going on that point. The language there is something that people want to be sure they understand in what they're saying, right? So cooler temperatures, I would agree with you. But then, like you said, go back to Louisiana many years ago, and the quote unquote the technological marvel was realizing that if you leave your front door and back door open, you get this wind that moves through that allows quote unquote a cooling system, right? And no, you weren't sharing it on the social media at that time, but also something to take into consideration. You go way back and say, even in those areas, let's say where people were maneuvering around, which even under argument, not to go off too far of a tangent, more recent research showed it was like 20 to 22,000 years ago in that neck of the woods, in that area, they've discovered some individuals that were hanging out. Besides the point, I think we need to clarify when people start talking about that and like virtue signaling, oh, I've got the answers, just go to 68 and you have this special bed and you're good to go. Well, just remember that what we were talking about was a difference in temperature. It's a difference in temperature from the daytime to the nighttime, right? So people are like, oh, it's the cooling that does it. It's like, no, it's the difference in temperature between what daytime temperatures were and what nighttime temperatures were. And so we get convoluted around this, like, well, we must have all been crazy. How do we get to this point in time if we didn't have these, fancy beds and cooler rooms? Like, well, we actually did okay because the difference in that daytime temperature and nighttime temperature was enough to create the like quote unquote effect of sleep. So something to consider.
Right. But now there's very little temperature gradient when everything is 70, right?
Yes.
In those internal rooms, and then
Yes.
now you need the extra 65.
Yes. Yep. Yeah. Exactly.
So
yeah.
Interesting.
So I guess there we had it. Put your thermometers up to 90 in the office.
Yes.
Yeah, that's it.
That's it. Solve the problem.
We'll fix it all.
So I figured today we would start off with a little intro on philosophy and its relation to technology, and then hop into fitness. So there gosh, there are a number of different connections between philosophy and technology, but there's this great quote from the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy. I've mentioned this a number of times, great resource from their article on the philosophy of technology. And we've talked about how philosophy can be construed many different ways. We mentioned one of them last time on our other podcast, on our previous episode. But going back to when we've talked about, if philosophy is the attempt to understand how things in the broadest possible sense of the term hang together in the broadest possible sense of the term from Wilfrid Sellers, philosophy should not ignore technology, especially today. It's largely by technology that society hangs together. It's hugely important not only as an economic force, but also as a cultural force. Indeed, during the last 2 centuries, when it gradually emerged as a discipline, philosophy of technology has mostly been concerned with the meaning of technology and its impact on society and culture. So, as you and I talked about, in ancient times and in ancient philosophy, there's this word techne that's related to like art and artifacts and technology, and that's where that all comes from. And like there is the wheel and the barrel and all these other things. Never has technology been so ever present in human life than it has been in the past 100 years, and it has fundamentally reshaped certain things, both for good and not so good. So philosophy comes in as like, hey, what sense do we make of all this for like who we are and how we interact with other things?
Yeah, when you wrote that, I paused to think about it, right? So we don't always fall prey to like, oh, this is a special time. But I can't disagree with that. That like there's just so many. I think it's just the amount of them that basically make you make that statement, be like, this is true. This is a very special time in terms of that. I got a question for you though. I was trying to think of, not as late as Aristotle making these like questions on a rock, but around the 1600s, were there any philosophers that saw the current, novel new things that were at the time maybe called something like these technological marvels, right? I don't know, steam engine or electricity or something at the time. And were there philosophers at the time who had like a bit of a conversation around these newest things in terms of utility and what it meant to the current culture, et cetera?
Sometimes. So just to clarify a time period, were you talking like
So I'll center in on something.
1800s? Okay.
Yeah, I'll center in on the scientific revolution.
Okay. Yeah. Very much so. I mean, yeah.
Okay.
Descartes, Leibniz, Hume, Locke, in a lot of ways, a lot of what they're trying to grapple with is like the new science, Newton, and these technological pieces where we can kind of like quantify things. We can quantify the time that elapses for an object to fall, and like how we make sense of, I mean, the very phrase like clockwork universe and God is like the master, like watchmaker who sets everything in motion, kind of comes from this time. So I think, yeah, there's a lot of that where it's trying to grapple with like these new technological developments and then make sense of how we view the world and how it works. Yeah.
Cool. Was there anything you can add to that on some interesting polar opposite thoughts of some that were just like it's all going to end up in dismay, and then others were like, listen, we got to mesh with this. Were there any philosophers on either side that?
Oh yeah, I mean, I think most of who kind of, this is where like history comes in, and like we look back more admiringly, generally speaking, on the philosophers who are like, oh yay, scientific revolution, and the ones who were not so much kind of fall by the wayside. But yeah, I mean, the people that we're aware of today, like Hume famously said, like his treatise of human nature fell stillborn from the press. Like no one cared. Do you know what I mean? Like very few people cared, and it's only in retrospect. So there were a lot of people who were very anti this in a lot of ways. And it was only later that it came to be kind of looked at favorably.
Okay.
So.
Okay, cool. Well, I'm asking that just out loud to maybe I just think that listening to those people and the questions they asked would be really beneficial for our conversation today. Because I think some of the questions they asked may be another way of you and I asking the same questions today with the amount that we have in front of us, right? Yeah. So I just think the way they may have looked at it may have been really good.
Now,
Or we
one
could
of
probably
them,
go further back, and
yeah,
get the base.
one just came to mind, and I'm by no means a Malebranche scholar, Malebranche,
Okay.
kind of from Descartes' time, but he, have you ever heard of the view called occasionalism?
No.
Okay, so it's basically the idea that like literally in every single instance of any particular action, God has intervened. Like
Okay.
the cup falls off the table, like God did it. So,
Got it.
and I doubt any Mall branch scholars are listening at the moment, but like if I'm butchering this, let me know. But like as a counter to the scientific worldview, where like, oh, this is a clockwork universe with like laws and order that's kind of set in motion and going, a counter view was this like, no, at every single instance God is intervening in these
Mm,
particular things. So
mm. He's a
not
busy
quite
fella.
on the what's that?
God's a busy fella.
Very busy. So not quite on the technological side, but you can kind of see this philosophical like push against like, science
Right.
and law and order and
Right.
nature and that type
Got it.
thing. So yeah.
Okay. Okay. That would be cool.
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah. It's always good to hear that point of view.
So, just like we were saying earlier, like it's been so much, right? It's, if it had just been artificial lighting, right, that would have been sufficient. But like, we have refrigeration and supermarkets and radio and TV and video games. And then like when you look at the list of like what's coming in the next 100 years, like AI and autonomous vehicles and the metaverse and everything's electrical and privacy and big data, like there's a lot of change on the horizon.
Yeah, to go that big leap you just had there. I love you said supermarkets. I totally didn't have that one on the list. That's such a great technological marvel, which is
Yeah.
connected to the refrigeration and economy and et cetera, et cetera. But that was really good. I really like that one. Yeah, it's that going from that analog to digital. Would that be the big polar differences and the major things we talked about there? Is that analog to digital big switch, maybe?
Yeah.
Majority of the focus is in that quote unquote, you know, immaterial world, right? And the mesh between the two.
Yeah. And electrification, I think. I mean, that
Yes.
just enabled like
Yes.
everything we think of as like a new technological development, for the most part, in one way or another, owes
Right.
itself to electrification.
So we could go back to that. I gave this as a book reference before. It's called At Day's Close, and it was in reference to something else for sleep and whatever. But it's a great book where they study this particular period of time in the late 1400s in England and what people did during the night. But what you can extract from it was like how we lived in darkness. What did we do prior to everyone having access to electricity? And they talk about sleep rhythms and lifestyle and murder and perversions and shit that people did. And they also talked about like lifestyles and how stuff shut down and there was a full acceptance. Anyway, my whole point being is that I think I would agree with you that the electricity component and then the scaling of that was a game changer. That's a big, let's call it a technological marvel. That's a game changer. Yeah, I had down in that same list, but I think it has to do with that um, internal combustion engine, medicine, refrigeration, and electricity. I thought those were just like game changers. And then I went back further and said, well, what would have been something to consider a technological marvel further back? And then it becomes a little bit more loose, but agriculture, tribes into civilizations, language, and probably the wheel goes in there too, maybe.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. But like horse and carriage, right? That's a technological domestication of animals. It moves. That's what I bucketed in the agriculture area. Yeah.
Right.
Anyways.
And there's a lot more time previously to absorb these things
Yes.
relative to now, where it's just like, on the one hand, you know, the most, standard person in America has a greater quality of life than, the greatest kings from 500 years ago in one sense. But in another sense, it's like just this overwhelming change to who we are, biologically speaking.
Yeah.
It's really profound.
Yeah. I like what you're, I love this conversation. because I think about this a lot. It's about the I always take this idea into consideration, right? It's um, how I learn something. So I'll just give you an example. I'm reading a book on Barry Goldwater, who was a former conservative politician in Arizona, and was just interested in learning about his background. And if I was to try, I just think about if I was to try to attain that knowledge, the quote unquote work I would have to do in 1999 to get that, right? As opposed to, I was thinking the current 2022, if you wanted a book or information on Barry Goldwater, right? It's like, what I'm saying? Like, and it's like, what are we talking about in the margins there? I love your word, the absorption speed, right? The absorption speed of those technological things, which is very precise for our conversation today, is that I think that's a human expectation today, that the absorption speed needs to be very quick for these new technological marvels. And we're not giving a lot of humans time to like really work through all the, the goods and bads, the ups and downs, et cetera, et cetera. Bringing back to my point, like I'd have to like walk to the library, do the search, find the book, find do the reading, take a note in case I couldn't take the book out, right? Read it, et cetera, et cetera. And now it's just like, wiki, 5 seconds, full history, date, age, birth, death, significant other. It's like, okay, got it. Anyways, I love that word, the absorption speed. I think that's the big issue now with what we have as humans standing today and getting that, and like 1,000 years back, how they took that. Yeah.
No, I totally agree. And like, even if you think about something like music, and like, people will argue about like, are records the best, and 8-track and tape and CDs, like that's a micro blip in history. Like physical media for like music is a nothing burger.
Dude, really good point. Really good point. I'm glad you made mention of that. Gosh. Anyways, that's a really good point. The music one. My gosh.
Will anyone remember that there were different media formats in like 200 years?
That's right. That's, I just think about, I just quickly went through like the Rolodex of the 8-track to the, or the phone on the top of the, but I also did connect something really nicely there, not to summarize, hopefully what we can get everyone to today, but is this traditional awareness around the beauty inside of that record player. Right. And hopefully people who are listening in are tying that into fitness, right? Because there are some traditional, older models of thinking that make the slow, the slower, kind of broken, imperfect fitness journey really special, right? And instead, the metaverse, where you think you're doing pull-ups, but you're not, but it's really pristine and it's like tight and digital. That's, I think, what I'm connecting to your music point.
Yeah.
But I'm connecting, right? It's like people making music within like 3 hours today, like a full album, electronic interference and connection and voice changes, et cetera. Right. And think of all the, the pain the Beatles had to go through to make, to get everyone together for the 69 record. What was that? Anyways, the history of it is besides this, but anyways.
So am I hearing you correctly that you're a hipster with regard to fitness? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I could take that on. I take that word, right?
We'll get you the handlebar mustache and the plaid and the skinny jeans.
Hey, whatever you want, the clothes, whatever, if it comes with all other paraphernalia that are associated with hipster, I'm out. But hey, clothing, language, good to go.
Yeah, but it's really, when you go through when you mentioned medicine, like when you go through the litany of things, like there are proto versions of medicine, obviously, that go throughout history in one way or another. But like most people don't realize, like conventional medicine, like what we call conventional medicine, like the beginnings of like actual medical schools is like a little over 100 years old.
Yeah.
Just did not exist.
Yeah.
So there's so much about who we are, and that's changed. And like you were saying, that rate of absorption, which whatever it is, who knows how to even quantify it, but what I can definitively say is that it's finite.
Yeah.
That's what I know. Like for human beings, like there is a finite rate of absorption, even though it seems like we can come out with these new technologies, like the ability of the human organism and society to then absorb, process and all the rest of that stuff. I don't know the rate or how you even measure it, but I can guarantee it's finite.
Yeah.
So
And I believe in that. And we know that to be true because there's a shit ton of people today who have lots of information and a lot of calories and not content. That's reality. That's just the way
yeah,
it's. So with all that we have, it's not seemingly better. So I agree with you totally. I think the cool thing is that you and I and others are involved in a project of trying to figure out, which is pretty cool to the umbrella of this topic today, is how do we mesh with this, right? What questions do we ask, right? What questions should we ask around decision making? But what questions, just to your point, fundamentally should we ask on like what is important? Right? What is important relative to, if there's 28 things and we make people aware that there's 28 things, maybe we'll strengthen their ability to ask questions like, what's the 6 most important that I can focus on? And how do I figure that out? Yeah.
Right. And one of the things, philosophy specializes in is, if you think of it metaphorically, like someone careening down a river that's just getting faster and faster and faster, like metaphorically speaking, what philosophy asks you to do is mentally step out, look at the river, and then ask like,
Yes.
what is important? Where am I going? What am I doing? Like, how does this all, how does this impact me? How does this impact society? How does this impact what I view as the meaning of my life? How does this impact how we view each other? And I mean, the hard part, and this is where, again, like the philosophy kind of comes in, whether we like it or not, this change is happening. Like AI is being researched, like it's happening. Now we as individuals need to make sense of like, what do we do? Because we aren't going back.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
We have to figure out, what do we do now?
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. There has been, people can do some research on Max Tegmark. That's a name you can read. Nick Bostrom as well. Super Intelligence or Life 3.0. Those would be the 2 books on that. But you just hit on a point that's of interest. I mean, we could use the psychedelic movement as a way to determine, like, is this culturally relevant? Where, there was a point in time where this started coming up, and then the psychedelic movement, people were like, too many individuals came in and was like, oh, that's just going to fuck a whole ton of people up. Stop it. No more conversation, research, anything. Right. And now looking back, it probably could have been like, approached at a much more safer, like, how does this mesh level? Right. Same thing applies though to AI. If people don't know, there was quote unquote called an AI winter about 25 years ago, where the same kind of thing happened. Things sped up, shit got really quick, et cetera, with data and computation. And then there was a big thwarting on it. And so now we're in the back end of what would be considered, and you're reflecting on it, this big open thing of like, it all can move forward and we can just put things on top of one another. And I agree with you. We're trying to figure out at this point in time. And I'm just speaking out loud so everyone hears it. I would hate for us to be a part of the generation involved in that second winter. I just don't think it's going to lead to. I think thwarting it may not lead to some positive movements. So I'm just saying it out loud that I would much rather we just have quote unquote cooler heads with great intentions and people that are really positively interested in seeing how all this meshes together, and then move it forward and ask like big questions and see how it can overcome a tremendous amount of things positively, right? Big things. Like, for example, changes in financial structure, right? Changes in labor, like big things. And I think that having artificial intelligence and the newest technologies in good hands and good minds, I think will allow that to happen. So I just picked on that based upon your comment of these ups and downs that we can get. And currently to today, I don't think we want to participate in another AI winter or a second version of it.
No, I agree. And I've thought about that issue with relation to number of technologies before, about like, there are other options besides these 2, but if you think about it in terms of like, is the better route to like try and philosophize and investigate as much as possible before the thing, and then only after allow the thing, or to allow the thing and then like, you can't see the unforeseen things until the thing comes about. So it's a hard thing, but I would generally say I more often than not lean towards, well, we got to kind of like tread cautiously, but kind of proceed with the thing, because you can't know what the thing is going to cause until you have, you know what I mean? Like the experience.
Yeah,
So
totally get it. I mean, you just summarized Super Intelligence, the book, really. Not saying that people shouldn't still read it, but if you want to think about it, in that person's mind, where they're thinking about the future of technology, right? And the influence on humans in the past, et cetera, where we are and what things it could do, right? He asks all the questions you could think of, which you just like quickly went through the bigger ones, right? And the big one that I landed on, which you just indirectly said, is that we have to recognize that we, at this current point in time, may not even have the creative or brain capacity to know what could happen with this, right? Like even that notion itself, Eliezer Yudkowsky was the MIT professor who first said that to me. I was like, like that broke me. I had to pause the podcast, right? It's like, so what do you do about that? Like humans are not even capable of handling what could happen, or even coming up with what could happen. Just think about that. But you did that really well. And also I hope people listen in there. Just reference Super Intelligence as a book and read it, take your time, pause with it, and it'll ask you all these, and you'll land safely, not freaking anyone out. You'll land safely. You'll see that just has to be in good hands, and we have to be ready to be able to know what the switch is, turn the switch on, turn it off, and what controls that, etc.
Yeah, but it's always, it's always dancing on a knife's edge. It's always,
yes,
yeah.
yes. But I love the language you had there of like, I'm not sure what your thoughts are on that, but I think we definitely need a whole lot more philosophy of artificial intelligence. Yeah, definitely do need more and more people. Besides, I think there's only like one conference, big one, that happens once a year. And then there's others that are like spin-offs, but we need like big institutions, right? Large scale institutions and academics that do this all the time, I think, for the next 10 years.
Yeah.
For us to your point, ask all these questions prior to the advent of these implementations inside of culture.
Oh yeah, we need lots of people sitting on the metaphorical bank of the river.
Yeah.
Kind of like saying, "Hey, what are you guys doing?
Yeah.
What's going on?"
Yeah. We could use Facebook and like the initial assumptions on that and the intentions, right? And the like fast track into that. Be like, we're just going to bring everyone together. Okay, how'd that work out for the Tunisian elections? Or how about Instagram and harm to young females, right? This undisclosed, like, how are we connecting the dots on that one, right? It's like, so there's a bunch of these things that we probably, I don't know if it's possible to have in a what's it called, a room where you're just in there playing with all these things, right? Philosophizing on it, asking questions and playing with it before it like gets out. I don't know if it's possible now that I'm thinking about that.
I don't know. I mean, I think for better or worse, it's that, just like we were just saying, it's that dancing on the knife's edge and kind of like letting it go, but always having like a hand on like the emergency brake of like, okay, what consequences is this leading to?
Yeah.
So just a little primer on like what is technology, like what sort of thing is this, and going back to like the ancient Greeks and techne and art and the difference between like nature and art. So dictionary definition: the application of science, especially to industrial or commercial objectives. Electronic or digital products and systems considered as a group. That's the more recent version of it, but some interesting kind of like philosophical musings on this. Technology is not natural, although very often art or technology imitates nature. It's something that humans create, not created by nature in the traditional sense. Of course, humans themselves are nature, but contrast that with like the Grand Canyon or something like that. And then a big one that Kant and others talk about when they talk about like philosophy of art is that something that cannot replicate or create itself, contrast with biological organisms. So something that doesn't have like an internal like telos or purpose to itself aside from what it is given by its creator. we'll see how this one pans out in the next 100 years.
Yeah, right. Right. That's why I was pausing on that one. I was like, oh man, we're going to have to definitely contend with that one in that definition.
But every other piece of technology up to this point 100% falls under that.
Definitely. Yes.
Yeah, that could
be meaning the change in definition in 20 years.
Right.
Say. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's something that leads to the creation of entirely new things that never existed, that help us, get certain things done that we need to get done, like grow food or build houses. And then certain things that go beyond mere survival, not just instrumentally useful, but things like, we don't need to go to space to survive. We don't need to know how old the pyramids are to survive, but science allows us to do those things, to wonder about the world and figure out what's going on.
Yeah, I'm glad you threw in the Grand Canyon there, because there's a lot of technological marvels that wrap around that entire thing. And it's only more biased and present for me reading Goldwater because of the background Arizona production of water that came into the valley, and the Colorado River and the dams. So you just think of a dam as a technological marvel, right? And again, no beaver is going to put that together. Be like, this is going to help the humans, So it's but it just goes to show. And what I was getting through the thread there was, hopefully by the end of this call, because you just clearly defined it really, and you can find some different areas how you're going to define it, it's going to allow us to fall back really quickly to this particular definition when we start saying, well, what's the pros and cons of technology for fitness? I think having those words in place of, like, the chance, biologically especially, of irreplaceable, or the unnatural, I think simple words like that, we can fall back on when we're like, how's this going to fit into this whole fitness pursuit? So I appreciate Absolutely. That.
And then once we have kind of a sense of technology, we can ask, the philosophical question: how does technology relate to culture? How does it influence how we view ourselves, others, how we should set up society? Bajillion questions here, but like one pretty relevant one that's going to be really relevant in the next 100 years, and is starting to be very relevant for truckers, let's say. We could be on the verge of getting to a point where most humans won't need to work as it's classically understood. Now, on the one hand, that could, depending on how you look at it, hunter-gatherers and stuff like that. I mean, there's lots of debate and discussion around, well, hunter-gatherers didn't really need to work that much per se compared to like farming culture, right? Like they would hunt, but then most of the time they'd play. So maybe it returns us back to something like that. But how does that, like, can you imagine that, like, such a world where so much of who we are today is like, well, what do we do? And then what do you do when you're not like a fitness coach or a lawyer or something like that? So just a profound potential influence on culture and economics, universal basic income and all that stuff. So
yeah, you just hit on the last word. I tiptoed into that particular area with Andrew Yang's conversation with Sam Harris many years back prior to his presidential nomination, around after he had sold his company, what he was thinking about in regards to like, what's a big thing, right? What's a big thing that's a changer, et cetera. And I would just ask people to continue to use universal basic income as your entry into what you're speaking about, which is, how can you psychologically contend with these massive fundamental changes that will happen, right? Not possibly could, will happen. And of course, we need to talk about what will happen, but you gave a couple of instances there, travel, or like how, we move things across land, right? How about you don't need humans for that? Oh, I was going to need humans for that. This is where we draw the line between, okay, is there a timeline on it, or what we're discussing? And it is going to happen. Retail, like what it means for security versus coming in and having a human actually enter. So we essentially can go down this road with like retail, fast food, trucking. I think there was like 2 other points that Andrew pointed out, and I'm just voicing it to say it's a good spot for you to philosophize and contemplate over how you're going to contend with these really big things that may happen in your lifetime, right? And what do we do about that? And it's it does fall right in our lap for fitness because we have to discuss that, which we'll get to, but it kind of sets it up really well. It is a big thing to think about. Where does the human come into this when machines become dominant? That's the big one.
Yeah, exactly. When AI can, program your nutrition and program your fitness, and what about the human relationship and all those different things.
Yes.
Just a couple more mini questions that we'll just lightly touch on, and then we'll dive right into fitness, but just to give people a flavor for kind of like the questions that philosophy of technology asks. Obviously, one that we'll be asking that many people, I'm sure, even who haven't studied philosophy, ask themselves, does technology always mean more progress? There's a story and a narrative behind that. It certainly led to a lot of benefits, but it can also pose, risks to social values. So a famous example is, the iPhone. I'm about as big an Apple geek as anyone. And, the iPhone has had a lot of really amazing benefits for a lot of different potential things, but there are a lot of drawbacks, I mean, I'm old enough to remember, and I suspect you remember as well, like, oh, wouldn't it be cool to just like answer an email real quick on the beach, and then like, yeah, you can just go back to being you, but now it's always connected, never off. Chronic blue light exposure, tech snack, and social isolation, and the constant need for the I remember when Apple announced, because I would watch all the keynotes, like, wouldn't it be cool if you didn't have to go into your email to see if you had a new email? You get a notification, and it's a push notification. And now we have the, oh no, do not disturb, save me from the notification.
The overcorrection.
It's like, whoops.
Yeah, they're building it into their own systems.
Right, exactly. And Instagram, like to your point earlier about, young girls and their self-image, there's a part of Instagram they partly did just to like alleviate the pressure they were getting on them, but like, how many hours am I using it, and like, can I set off this time, and like, that type stuff.
Yeah.
Crazy.
Oh man, so much. Well, no, the craziness for sure, but there's so much in there in terms of the change. What I think about there is the change from the interweb to the iPhone to attention media platforms, these three big like things on top of one another, right? So just think about trying to explain to someone, like explain to Ronald Reagan during his tenure, oh yeah, you can just explain this and you can get it to 1 million people in a couple of minutes. It's like, what? There's going to be this internet where you can just propose. So I was just trying to think about, how to contend with all that when they're all jammed together. And I won't pause it, but anyways, you stopped me in my tracks for just reminiscing on just how large it is, just how large of the growth has been. Yeah, that's what made me pause there.
Yeah, and I mean, going back to one of the points you were making earlier about like, we don't know what we don't know, even for the people who developed this. So again, like I've read a ton about Apple. Like Apple famously for a very long time was not so great with third-party software. Like that was a famous thing. Like they were, it was the PCs, and then Apple kind of had their own stuff. So when the iPhone comes out, it's got a web browser. They don't do third-party apps. We're like, oh, we'll do web clips and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
And even Apple themselves are debating, should we have an app store? Should we not? And then a year later, they come out with it. And then everything, Facebook, Twitter, all this stuff that like Facebook existed pre-iPhone, but of course, nothing accelerated that like that. And then talking about things you couldn't foresee before you created them, right?
Yeah. Like Steve Jobs would say stuff like that. You could just see Bill Gates like in his room just cracking when he would say it, right? Like, we're just going to take your desktop and put it in your hand all day. Is like crack, with all these apps of all this stuff, and you can do all, your computer is basically in your hand. It's like, holy crap, it actually is going to that. Add the phone to it, add the connection to other people. You got yourself a storm.
Yeah, but even like Apple themselves, who developed the phone, had no idea like what people would do with the App Store. So yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah, and it is a current way to observe this as like technology, this whole story, would be to watch Hulu's the Theranos story.
Oh, the dropout.
Dropout.
Yeah, great. Fantastic.
Oh man.
One of my favorites.
Yeah, but I mean, it's all of this, right? Technology, falsifying, belief, absorption, speed, right? Popularity instead of like science, like all of it is in there, right?
Yeah.
Fascinating story.
Oh yeah, super, super. I mean, it was very well done. And like I had followed it back when it was happening just because I was
Same. It was local to me,
interested.
right? It was local to me.
Oh,
We used
yeah, right.
Theranos like every couple of weeks, dude.
Oh, really? Wow.
Yeah, no, we have the Walgreens right there, the
Wow.
wellness center that my wife and I used, and realized after a couple of years, it was the same Quest or whatever technology, Siemens technology they were using, but saying it was the blood droplets. You know, it's like, and we were trying to, because Jeff Trabot and I were saying, but dude, all of it lines up. Like we did this expensive $450 test, and I did this $9 test, and it's the same scores. So Leanne and I and everyone in the room, I mean, we were all bought it, right? We're all like, oh yeah, this is the fucking greatest thing ever. Even to the point where we're thinking about how do we get into some investment of these spin-off cottage country businesses that are going to come from this, right? Because essentially, on the outside looking in, they essentially said like, oh, that whole really expensive laboratory thing, rip it apart. Rip it apart like it's useless. We're like, wow, this is fascinating. Anyway, so it's local to me, very, very personal to us.
And I mean, I knew about some of the deception when reading the John Carreyrou stuff, but like until watching the show, I did not realize the depth of the like diluting the blood and then putting in the semen machine and erasing data sets and crazy.
Dude, every time the show finishes at night, it's classic. Leanne goes to bed. I take a couple of minutes, put Lily our own little routine. But for the past number of nights after we're finishing one of those episodes, we pause and look at each other like, that was crazy. Like we continually say this every night. Like, I can't believe that was going on. It seems like it's because it's more of a personal thing to us, right? It's like, gosh, I can't believe we really did think that there was truth in those values. And now you see it in an entertainment setting from actors and the story. It's like, gosh, pause and reflect on that. Anyways, it's a great story for our conversation today on what was considered to be a technological marvel, right?
Oh yeah.
The 30 years that went into developing the Siemens machine, right? It's just like, whatever, drop of blood, get all this information.
And would be cool if true. And, this is where like the distinction between like wanting to believe the thing and, there being a reality to it. And I think one of the things they mentioned in the show is like, we might say there are all sorts of bad or unsavory things that come from the move fast, break things mentality of Facebook and like apps and stuff like that. But that isn't someone's cancer results. Do you know what I mean? Like,
yeah,
you might have all sorts of unsavory stuff, but it's not like, you're going to die of a heart attack or you have prostate cancer or what have you. So
yeah. And to make it more real and harrowing, I guess it'd be a spoiler alert. So just plug your ears. But this resulted in people killing themselves, right? And lives lost in this, right? So to your point, that was serious, right? When it becomes like that, where it's human and breaking humans, I don't know. That's where we got to call it.
Yeah, no, I totally agree.
Yeah, that's where you should be put in jail.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. Hopefully that happens with her. We'll see.
Yeah.
And then I guess the last question, then we can kind of dive into fitness is, this has been one throughout, the philosophy of technology. Is technology inherently value neutral? Do we just say, oh, well, it's just a piece of, it's a TV, it's a sound bar, it's a hammer. Like, yeah, you could use a hammer to kill someone or to build a house, or you can use an atomic bomb to obviously commit war crimes, or you could use it to deflect an asteroid from hitting Earth. Or is there an inherent value in a technology depending on maybe its purpose or its design? Maybe we can use an atomic bomb for like non-atomic bomb things, but like the reason it was developed was to like
energy, right?
Yeah.
fission or nuclear energy today.
Yeah.
Right. I'm not sure, Robbie, but could, at the same time with the Manhattan Project or what was going on, I'm sure there's some things that came from that were not nefarious that led to like nuclear power generation, right?
Right.
So I
Yeah.
mean, I think that answers my question. I think it's probably because I could simply fall back on the hipster and say, it's unnatural and therefore ... But yeah, I'm not sure. Yeah, I'm not sure about that one because I think about what are the inherent values in nature. That's what I went to asking the question. What are the inherent values in nature? But I think that current human nature involves culture. And when culture is inside of that, new definition of that experience, I think inside of culture, which is parented today, you have to make good decisions with lots of conversations and lots of questions on like, is this good? Is this not good? Let's try it with this. Let's do this. It's got to be, you got to spin it in the circle, right? And I think that, or spin it in the system or the quote unquote town square, have conversations and then make decisions. And that means now it's culturally significant, right? Or culturally relevant. And then I would say that I'm not sure if that gives you an answer to your question for me personally, but I think I use, what's his name? Kevin Kelly, I think, who wrote The Inevitable. He was the Wired CEO or Wired head editor for Wired. Anyways, he was like, we have to learn how to mesh with technology, not mess with technology. I think in very simple terms, right? That says everything that I just said. Blend with it. Is it in the culture? How is it effective? And ask lots of questions just to make sure it doesn't get us into trouble. So
Yeah.
I'm not sure if that gets into the values area, but
Yeah, no, it does. And I mean, that's going to basically connect us right to the fitness technology thing. And perhaps the first thing we'll discuss of devices where, you could ask based on what we just said, where is it technology inherently value neutral? Like we could just say, oh, there's no inherent value one way or the other, good or bad, to a Whoop or to a kettlebell or a dumbbell or a Peloton. It's just what you use it for.
yeah.
And then, there might be, and perhaps there is a counterpoint where you say, well, what's it being developed for?
Yeah. Yeah.
Is it for these subscription? Do you know what I mean? Like those types of questions where it's not just some random object that like exists. It has a purpose behind it that I guess we can debate, what kind of value is associated with that. But that's really where it comes from, is this question of like, are all these, if we apply it to the fitness realm, we would say, are all these things just objects like a rock that have neither good nor bad values, or and then it depends on how you use them, or is there some inherent value to them, perhaps dependent on how it's developed and who it benefits and that type thing?
Yeah, I just find the current, I'm generalizing, but the current crop of the options or the fitness things, call them wearables or tech or whatever our list is going to be for what current technology is, especially within fitness. And yeah, I just see them coming with, for good reason, I guess, but coming with all these things, like we're going to hack biology. We're going to make things much easier for you. This is definitely a better way to observe your health. Like they come with all those things, and but the people who mostly listen to those things don't know that it's based on a surveillance capitalism kind of concept, right? And I think that needs to be, maybe another day, or maybe no one even needs to hear that, but that needs to be stretched out. Like, well, how can you be sure of that? And I always just say, just follow the money, right? Just follow the money as to who's investing, who's putting all the energy into, and who are making the decisions up top that are saying, is this worthwhile and should we make these moves? And you know what their answers are? Is it going to make our shareholders or these, and then you follow that money, and it's largely wrapped around big pharma or big medicine. So it's really a so then inside of there, the public has to go, well, can I know those things, but also use this technology to help me move forward and progress? To that, I would say a resounding yes. But I just think that I personally believe so much more in, especially for today in 2022, the move back towards more intuition. But I totally understand why in 2022 it's signaled as being this answer for a whole lot of people, where I believe the answer is wrapped in experience and hard work and human intuition. And so I think that's the balance that I think we have to play out. Yeah.
Yeah, that definitely makes sense. And I think, I mean, I don't know how fine grained we want to get with it, but I broke things into potentially different classifications. And I feel like there are things that have more potential for being nefarious and things that have less potential. So if we started off with like the very basic of the basic, like fitness devices, and we talk about like resistance on the one side and aerobic on the other, like, we've got barbells and dumbbells and kettlebells, and like, was that nefarious to have developed those, or like a basic Schwinn device? I don't think so. It's like, I mean, maybe perhaps, but like, yeah, if it's a cold environment and you want to breathe a little bit, okay, yeah, hop on a Schwinn. Or like, hey, rocks are cool, but like, I want to be able to be a little bit more precise with my weights, and you know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
And that's not tracking anyone. That's not submitting any data anywhere. Like that type of stuff.
Yeah. I think that's a good question. And it allows us though to clearly define, I see this continuum that's arising here, right? Because I classified all the things that you'd mentioned there as modalities that are capable of allowing people to physically challenge themselves to improve their resilience. So yes, it's called a new technological marvel, the Airdyne Schwinn, right? And it does come packed with, just besides the cost, which today it's like $150 at your local, old age home or elder folks area. That's the biggest thing to it. What's on the other side of it, right? On the other side of it, massive potential for you to improve your resilience, right? So I think that helps me by you asking that question that way, like what fits into these areas, and it creates a good continuum, and I think I'm going to say right from the get-go here, just to start with those two, wearables versus modalities. I think wearables sits farther away from modalities because of all the things that I just said are inside of the things you can get from this. Because if we were to philosophize and like argue over that on the wearables area, dude, I reach bedrock philosophically with most people pretty quickly. It's like, we can't even continue. Like we've stopped now. So I think thank you for that. Cause now we can add more to it, right? Where does this fit in? Where does, yeah.
No, and I think that's a great way to describe it. And so again, I think those two ends of the spectrum is like exactly right. So here's a middle case for you. The middle case being the modality / monitoring device. So our Pelotons, our Mirror, our Tempo Studios, our Fight Camps, where we've got the recording and the apps and the data sets and the things like that. I saw one the other day as like, have you seen the one that's like the boxing with the music? Like you're hitting the like drum pads. And so thoughts on that? Thoughts on those?
Yeah, immediately my brain goes to why would you want to quantify the work that's being done? That's the question I would ask, to kind of like, because if the why behind the quantification of that is for, it's going to allow people to see their progress. We all know that's horseshit. Like background, well, you and I may know it as that, but I think a lot of people will start to see that over time as like, well, what am I getting with that? So I that does, to me, the quantification of that lean more on the wearables aspect. Because now, and then let's see if I'm close to it. I would say what's on the other side of the modalities would be running shoes. You see that? So the running shoe is a fucking technological marvel that, could be seen as a modality, right? And then you can say, well, give me a close second to compete against Concept 2's rower. And I would say, you got to come to Idaho and do some kayaking with me for a couple hours. You see what I'm saying? Like, I'm not going to offer you anything in quantifying what we did, but I can tell you your experience and the work that you'll do and the benefits you get from it, your intuition and all these things that build your resilience is alarmingly higher than what that rower with that quantification seems like you're getting. So I'm not sure if that splits it a little bit, or I think the quantification aspect and the why behind the quantification is something that I kind of just have more questions to. But that's very good. That's good, challenging. I love this play, by the way, because in my mind, I love developing these continuums of systems, right? It helps my language, so I appreciate it.
No, that was super helpful. And I think you brought out an aspect of technology that I failed to mention, that kind of relates to science and, kind of this move from the qualitative to the quantifiable, right? Like with science and with technology, all the way back from, Galileo trying to figure out, like, how do I clock this thing falling from the tower? And now we just have like tremendous precision with what we are able to quantify. But as we'll talk about, like, what does that mean? Is that useful? It seems as though it's just like you were saying, these repetitive sets on the concept two are better, but like, what about, being out in nature and kayaking? And from someone who's done it, it's not just someone poo-pooing like,
right.
Oh, this modern stuff, from someone who's like lived and breathed in like that realm, and then saying like, oh,
perhaps. And ironically done more of the former, a lot more of the sets on the quantification than the opposite end, right? So, but I go back to your point on, the back in time, the big minds asking those questions, right? I'm sure at the time, a lot of people were like, why are you even asking this question? why are you going after that, right? Like, there's so much beauty in just the apple falling from the tree. Why do we need to have, meters per second? And lo and behold, we find out hundreds of years later, like, it prevents, I don't know, thousands of people every hour from dying. This is these preventable catastrophes. All why? Because we decided to ask those really hard questions, right? On the value beyond just the quality of it, right? We're going to quantify exactly what's happening here. So I see that in another thread. This may be something that you'd be interested in, is generally always the certainty and the love that people can have for macros, right? And the quantity aspect, right? The numbers, right? And I totally get it for humans as to why that is the case. Whereas, there has to be some conversation with, I think both you and I agree with that. It's got to be an equal balance of like the quality of it at the same time, right? So we have to balance these things. And I see that as the same way, what you were just asking, moving from this, just eat, 3 meals a day and chew well and make sure it's unpackaged. But then what's the science to it that's going to make it work, for people? And do we need science in order to do we need technology to do that? I think we do. We need LearnRx, right? We need CoachRx for you to track it, right? I'm calling my own shit here, right? We need maybe some, chronometer, to kind of pull that stuff together. So these are all technological pieces that are going to help that quality aspect move forward.
Yeah, absolutely. But I do tend to agree with you that a lot of them, they are definitely, some deeper micronutrient insights and chronometer, like deeper blood sugar insights and like a CGM, but more often than not, they are corrective rather than like the necessary thing. And, when you think, very often I'll bring up this point to people of like, we didn't know what a calorie was until the middle of the 1800s. And we sure as shit weren't tracking macros. We didn't even have the concept of it.
Yeah.
And yet, for all of human history, people were able to maintain and regulate a regular weight. And ironically, it's only once we became aware of that concept that, it wasn't a cause and effect thing, but like,
but it's
calories and macros that morbidly obese. Right.
Connector.
So like we somehow managed with, and animals do this all the time. They have no concept of how much or little anything is and manage to regulate. What they're, but I
love
think
that. So we could say maybe, just to kind of create a principle inside of there that we're seeing some through lines for a bunch of different areas is the aspect of quality first, and the knowledge of it, right? And we of course have to define that more so, but right, just spend time there, keep discussing it, philosophize on it, but quantity will come in. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? Like so I guess this is the way I say it in CCP nutrition, right? It's like most times if you focus all your energy with all your clients on the psyche and behavior around quality, a lot of the quantity stuff takes care of itself. Whereas if you do the opposite, you first focused on quantity, you will get into irreplaceable broken behaviors when you want to trump the quality card, right? It's like, or just throw the quality card out. So I think that's a principle there that's had a couple of through lines here. The quality aspect, and then move it into the quantity or the technological. And then to bring it all together, right? Your experience in fitness, your capabilities, the subjectivism around all that, right? And then over time, we'll get into some specific stats and specific kind of science and maybe technology to help support it.
Yeah, no, I would generally agree with that. One place where I do wonder, and I do have a question, I'm just curious your thoughts, is resistance, right? So obviously intuitively we can know, oh yeah, this rock over here is lighter than this one, and but there being something to perhaps
I'm gonna send you a rock quarry.
yes, please do. The James rock set.
Oh man, I'm gonna sell it online like kids used to develop rock sets back in the day. They'd get their little soldiers in the mail, Oh.
Yep. No handles of any sort. Just costs
Figure
more to
it out.
ship than the actual device itself.
It'd be like the treadmill Peloton controversy. People be dying in like 5 days. Bring the marketing back. Oh my.
Dropping it on themselves.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, not that everyone's trying to, whether you call it a back squat or a deadlift or whatever you're focusing on, but like just this, oh yeah, there, it's kind of cool. Like, oh, I went up 2.5 pounds. You know what I mean? Like some quantity aspect, and like, particularly in resistance, that seems to me to be maybe a newer and more helpful. I mean, it's not that people haven't done something like this in the past, but there's something to that where you kind of like pass through the stages and then always trying to like hit that potential and different ways in which you can hit it without it being like, oh shit, this one over here is like, the Denny stone is like 400 pounds. And then this one's like, you know what I mean? Do you see any use for that, or more use for quantification in that case, or maybe not so much?
No, for sure. I love this conversation under the particular resistance realm. Also, I spoke for 3 hours almost straight only 5 days ago or 4 days ago on this particular topic. So it's right on the tip of my tongue in remembrance. And I'll put it in short form for an understanding is that it is in my belief too, that for people to work towards, if the presupposition that we're all agreeing we should move towards maximum physical potential forever, then you have to have your base support of being quality of movement through repetitions to gain motor control first on this journey. But then over time, we have these quote unquote conversations on standards, 1RM, what is load, what is the maximal load, how does this load compare to other movements, how do you monitoring exercises, etc. So you can call that all the quantification of this massive time spent on quality movement. So it is inside of the entire fitness journey for resistance. It's just that I would argue again in principle that it should come with motor control first, and a vast perturbations and variation and awareness and knowledge and competency, and for people even thinking about bending before they're even doing bending. Like, I mean, it's just years and years of that. And yes, we will get to the point. It's like, how much is that? How much is that? How much is that relative to your body weight? How much has that improved over the past year? Like, that's then the quantification of it with regards to the variances in modalities. And then I would hope to continue the story. I would hope that over time, right, which is what I'm experiencing, and I think I'm going to continue to experience. I don't think it's going to somehow all of a sudden shift with medicine or et cetera. I am starting to get the insights and lose pieces of quantification inside of all of my resistance training. So I think it's a full life circle there of because when you're resisting entropy towards the end of the story, so let's just make it personal for me, the next 30 years of my life, it doesn't really matter, right? It doesn't really matter what's on the barbell, right? But it will matter more about the quality of the movement relative to the resistance that I'm doing, that I'm able to overcome. But to back to your question, so I think it's, you can't see me on the screen, but I think it's like it's quality and then quantity, and then over life it becomes quality. Yeah. So eventually it's the rocks.
Yeah. Back to the rocks.
The
There's going to be another movie called The Rock. There was the one with Sean Connery and Nick Cage and Alcatraz, but now there's going to be a James movie where it's like The Rock.
Yeah. We'll have to get over the Dwayne Johnson controversies and trademark issues with that, but
yeah. But Sean Connery still says welcome to The Rock.
Oh, that's a good one. He's not owning that today. I don't know why. Every time Dwayne Johnson comes up.
No.
Funny. Anyways, I recognize my dog doesn't my dog doesn't like The Rock. By the way, little Lily, she's only like 15 pounds, a little Pomeranian trial mix, just because you mentioned The Rock. And she freaked out the other night. Hannah got as a gift, because she likes The Rock, she got this like full life, like 6'5" cardboard figure of him, with the eye thing and a nice suit, and like she brought out the thing out to the living room the other night, and Lily flipped her lid.
Oh, wow.
Like just shit her pants, like stuff up on her neck, the scents coming off her, like full visceral, like, response. She stank. She like just a horrible stink to her, right? Just based on all that stuff coming off. Anyways, so I'll be careful to tiptoe into The Rock and the rock quarry over time.
That territory. Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting. So I think we could say, maybe based on what we were discussing, in terms of like a continuum, we could maybe say like, with modalities on the one end and wearables on the other, we could say something like we've got fitness equipment over here on one end, your Schwinns, your barbells, your kettlebells, your dumbbells, and then maybe next over would be kind of like the Coach RX, Learn RX, MyFitnessPal, something in that realm that's kind of helping you dial that BLGs in. And then we kind of get to the like, now we've got the fitness equipment that is the wearable, like the Peloton, the Mirror, the Tempo, and the Fight Camp. And then we've got like the Aura, the Whoop, the heart rate monitors, the CGMs,
really good. Yeah. And I think if we spent, even hours on that away from this call, or we can ask people to do that, right? Maybe draw out your own bigger continuum with a bunch of different things. And if there's anything in there you come up with that we didn't mention today, just reach out, and I'd love to hear from it. We'll never report it in or do like a callback show, but I'd be interested in what you come up with regards to something I'm missing on top of that. Yeah.
And as virtuous as I think, well, maybe, I don't know if virtuous is the right word, but as much as I think a prescription device or modality could be beneficial to society or humanity, something like a CGM, when I think about all the use cases, like, and how profound it will be when it's, more accessible, or when they can do it optically or what have you, it is a corrective. Yeah. Like, you don't need a CGM if, you're sleeping 8 hours a night, and, you got the 3 meals and you got the quality, and like, you don't need a CGM. Like, I mean, unless there's something acute genetically, do you know what I mean? Like, type 1 or something like that.
No, but you are, with using CGM, you are bringing up that that issue that I said, earlier, that needs to be like, you need to say, like, how are humans going to deal with this today? And if you start with that premise, right, then CGM is off the table, right? It's like, because if you don't recognize, right, that it's normal for us to try to adapt and evolve and to make things easier, right? Do you really think people are going to like also use, I'm not asking you, but ask yourself this question, use the CGM and also use intuition after like a boatload of white rice in the afternoon, right? And be like, I'm not sure if that was a good choice. And then be like, let me see how I feel before I look at my CGM, right? It's like, I feel like having to sleep. And lo and behold, the CGM, like there's, I think to your point, most humans are going to use it as a corrective. And then because we adapt, guess what we're going to come up with? We're going to come up with something to correct that, right? It's going to, and this can be whole compensatory. And this ends up, what ends up going to happen is you're going to have uppers and downers, like just back and forth all the time. Just make sure you stay in this zone. That's what, don't forget to measure your HRV throughout the day with your uppers, with your downers, with your measurement of your uppers and measurements of your downers, right? It's like, I like this pre-workout because it helps me stay within my zone. What zone? Well, the zone that my watch tells me I should be, it's like, why? just move, just move around. Oh, you're tired? Just lie down, go to sleep. It's like, yeah.
No, agreed. And like about, interesting individual differences. So I'm sure you've seen or heard, like, and Brandon and I will sometimes joke about, so Michael Ban will talk about how, he'll do like 6 cups of rice a day with like BJJ training. I'm like, that would lay me out on the floor. Like, I know Michael Ban has forgotten more about like FDN and all that stuff. So I know he's got his stuff dialed in, but it's like, wow, that's impressive. So just thinking about like individual differences there, and like,
yep.
Intuitively, how do you not feel like you are dead?
That's right. That's right.
Yes.
That's the things I think about. And then it comes back to like, well, does any individual need the technological support to do that? And I don't think they do. I think they should just like observe what's going on in the choices they make and how they're like dealing with these tasks, and how you can use things like conversations on mental acuity. And, you can go to my LearnerX video, right? What's it called? My LearnerX video on the technology, or how am I doing? I think it's called How Am I Doing? I think that's the LearnerX video. Anyways, you can go to that one. But I talk about that. It's like, use these things like, what's my energy like throughout the day, right? And what should it be throughout the day? How do I feel, for 30 minutes, 60 minutes, 90 minutes after each of these meals, right? And what can I do as a feedback loop to like change up what I have during those meals, how I eat those meals, what's going on during those, like, this is where you go, and you don't need technology to support that. Just for those who are, in that particular area on the CGM, blood sugar mismanagement technology conversation.
Yeah. What I did, and I mean, I think we're pretty much in agreement in like this, even if this were a counterexample, which it might be, but like it's not, for philosophers, a counterexample is like, oh, that negates everything that was said before. It's like, no, this is really the one exception that kind of proves the rule. But just thinking about things where like quantification or data can be useful. I was talking to Brandon earlier today about something like LP(a). So
Yeah.
like for people who don't know, like Bob Harper, the Biggest Loser, he had like a Widowmaker heart attack, and I think his LP(a) was like, I don't know, 400. And for context, that's like it's a marker of heart health to a certain extent that is not quite as modifiable as oxidized LDL or LDL particle number, other things like that. And, normal values are closer to like, 30 to 50. So things like that, I think of, or other things that, man, you can BLG to your blue in the face, but if you've got an LP(a) of 400, or, I mean, like sometimes things like that.
I would use, for sure. I would use that story as probably just as an example of, there are areas probably for, the aspect of quantification, and because you used his particular name and his story, listen, we'll never know. Like, how do we know there's a fucking 18 other things that didn't lead to these particular things? And, it's like, you just never know, right? So I'm really cautious of saying, oh, it's the technology assessment that should have been in there to determine what this was. It's like, well, I don't know about that, but I'm not negating the fact that I'm sure there's some areas in there, but I don't know, Robbie, I guess I would have to like flush all those out. So for, that one and maybe others, I think I would be able to say it's very, very tough to create causative factors for that particular thing to say that, oh, technology should be embedded inside. Because, you just got to get in depth. You're gonna have to know the person, read the life story book, like know the whole picture, right? And lo and behold, what happens if we come down to like, well, it's just genetics, right? Like it was just, and now we're into like, well, okay, now this is interesting because this is culture, this is humans, and these, let's make it simple here for short. These are BLGs and this is food, right? And lo and behold, there's a particular kind of protein, animal protein, that when you're born and up until you're 37, you have no idea that's causing you like a major underpinning disruption, right? And no one would ever know why, because the technology wasn't invented, right? The technology wasn't invented in order for you to assess this. So I think that area is one area that I'm highly interested in, not only because of this underpinning of like what's going to come to how to, best suit humans for the current culture, but I've like, as you know, I'm interested in all the nefarious background shit that people are going to get into with regards to genetic, predisposition changes, or genetic formation, eugenics shit is going to come up again, like all the dirty stuff with that. So I think, to back up, I think the genetic one would be maybe an umbrella area where I'm in the room with you on that one. It's like, whoa, geez, is there new technology that's out there on the street, more accessible to all, that would certainly raise all ships, right? That we could get to this. So the Bob thing wouldn't happen, right? I mean, I'm all for that. That would be fantastic. But I'd be very careful to say that the technological assessment is going to, this is directly going to lead to this as being the causative factor, where there could be 18 other things, based upon that.
Yeah. And I mean, even if this is a thing, like we're talking like the 1% of the 1% relative to the BLGs, but there are, culturally people think, oh, well, if I have the gene for MTHFR or what have you, like, oh, well, that means such and such, when in reality, genetics loads the gun, environment pulls the trigger. But there's a spectrum, right? There's like, oh, cystic and fibrosis and Huntington's over here. We're like, no, yes, you got the genes. Yes. Like, there you go. Yes. There's double ApoE4. Like, oh, okay. Whoa, you better know about that one.
Yeah.
So, but again, I agree with you that those are like, let's focus on the BLGs first. But I was just thinking in my head of like different things that could be revealed that could be helpful, but a lot of it really does come back to kind of BLGs and stuff like that. So
yeah. Well, we're not going there, but that does make us, set up things down the road perhaps for another conversation on the nurture and nature conversation.
Yeah.
Right. Like these things, like, well, we know we die due to this, right? Genetics, toxic overload, wear and tear. But what is expression, right? What's your environment? What's the choices that you like? I mean, it's like this nice balance in there. And I think the technology does flop in here, right? It's like, well, how can we assess all of that, currently to today, which brings back just to your more recent topic of I think the past 30 years in genetics understanding is really, really a silent but very powerful story that's being asked.
Yeah, absolutely.
Which I love, by the way, just to put myself in a camp. I think it's a very powerful human endeavor, even more so, I would believe, in terms of AI in the future and hope. I think the genetics discoveries and like investigation today, I'm super excited to be alive when this is happening.
Oh yeah, and we're just really at the tip of the iceberg. I think this blood software, I forget the name of it, is now defunct, and
Theranos.
Well, not as nefarious, of course. I went to a Brian Walsh, and I'm sure like, yep, awesome, very smart dude, and I went to a seminar of his in Orange County, and he was showing off this piece of software that was using AI and blood chemistry to kind of like, oh, how closely does this correlate with like H. pylori? You know what I mean? Like, yep, extracting data out of like what is not immediately inherent in the data.
Yep.
Which is, that type of stuff is super interesting.
Yeah, it is really good. So. Yeah. And you got to give it up to these companies that did this genetic research for many years for giving up the data and not selling it at a super high cost. I know these people who tried to develop these genetic formulas and whatever, and they've always been, they truly want that project just to move forward. Right. So they're not allowing people like this to say, can we just like scrape it and try to create these correlations with all this data? So I think I agree with you. That's a very positive movement where, again, just back to our point to finish on, this newest forms of technology, when there's humans not in the room that could obviously find all these connections in 10 minutes, that would take us 1,000 years to like put all the paperwork together. No, honestly, it's 10 minutes that would take us 1,000 years. Right. Computation is actually, it's mind blowing, right? It is, because it does blow the mind. It blows the mind out of the water. It's so much better for the computation aspect.
Yeah. And the computer has no preconceived notions of what it should or should not be seeing in the data. Like
right. They're not like, oh, we better not tell them. We see all this lining up for H. pylori.
Right. Yeah. It's like, oh, we 80% correlation with H. pylori from a CBC and a CMP. It's like, what?
Yeah. Yeah. And the humans are like, well, how many people in your study? Oh, 27,000. Oh, how did you calculate all this, tough guy? 12 minutes with this box over here. Like that ends us really well on this beautiful mesh with technology that we can use as a base support to help us all move forward.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So let me ask you. So I know you were on a call previously. What do you think? You want to call that part one, and then we get to the bigger ones next time? How are you doing on time? How are you feeling? Like, where are you at?
Yeah, I think like I said earlier in the call, let's stop there and we'll break it up into some arms that not on the same idea of the continuum, but some arms underneath it maybe. And maybe we'll cover in part two some of the other arms that I think we do need to get into, that will take a little bit more. Yeah. Yeah.
So just to give some, people some ideas of different things that, obviously we'll decide on kind of what things we might want to chat about, but just a preview of some different things.
Coaching.
Yeah. Like, what does the practice of coaching have to offer? And from a human perspective, is it going to be like long haul trucking where it's just gobbled up by AI?
Right. The practice of it, like that in itself, I think could be a show unto itself, but it's big. And we very well
will do that. Or just the, there's all this talk, and we were just talking about like big data, like just because we can collect, like we just gave an example of like how you can extract meaningful data from these data sets, but there's whole slews of things where, people are like, oh, well, I've got this device that tracks this thing. It's like, well, is the data even meaningful? Like, yeah, you've got numbers to it, but like, does that number matter?
Yeah. And who decides if it matters?
Right. Exactly.
And who's the background folks saying that it matters? Like, there's a lot to it.
Yeah. Fitness in the metaverse. Digital pull-up.
We need to have buttons. Well, I got a haha button here I could use. But we need to have like crowd, just a second. We need to have those buttons because not everyone's going to see our face. So when we said the metaverse, this is what happens when we say the metaverse. Laughter and cheers. Yeah.
Contradiction in terms to say fitness in the metaverse.
Yes.
The philosopher's way of saying it.
Yes.
So anyway, just a little preview of some things we may discuss. But yeah, today we talked about philosophy and its relation to technology, how it's trying to make sense of the way in which technology has really transformed all these different aspects of culture and how we view ourselves and our place in the world, the different developments that are coming down the pipeline, what makes technology distinct from other things like nature, how it impacts culture, and then is it value laden, is it value neutral? And then mostly what we discussed with regard to fitness, but it was a huge topic, was this device and wearable aspect of things, and how nefarious or beneficial are those different modalities or wearables we were talking about. So
yep. And I think we're just on the tip of the iceberg for that one as we enter into that area, but I think we practiced it pretty good.
Yeah, absolutely.
Solid show. Thanks, Robbie.
Thanks so much, James.